You're listening to the Braver Angels podcast, a new way of talking politics. Okay, and thank you for returning and jumping back on board with us. I'm your host, John Wood Jr., joined by my illustrious co-host, the one and only Ciaran O'Connor, reporting to us live from New York. Ciaran, how you doing, buddy?
I'm good, man. I'm getting used to this whole quarantine thing. It's pretty fascinating how quickly humans can adapt.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of adaptation that has become necessary for us at this place and time. And we are joined by two individuals who I'm hoping can help us help our folks, followers, and members at Braver Angels and all of America to sort of adapt the right point of view in terms of how we deal with the challenges of the moment. So, folks, I'm very happy to reintroduce back to the Braver Angels podcast the one and only Ken Bone and the one and only Chloe Valdary. Ken, how are you doing? Chloe, how are you doing?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
I'm doing well. Excited to be a part of this conversation.
Absolutely. And Chloe, Ken, you two have never connected before in the past. Am I right about that?
That's correct. Ken, it's great to meet you.
Yeah, same to you. To be honest, I wasn't really familiar with your work before John invited me to the podcast, but I've checked it out a little bit, and I want to say I really appreciate your advocacy, especially for mental health care. Myself and my family, we all suffer from anxiety and depression. My son goes to special school because he has such terrible anxiety. He goes to night classes where there are fewer students because of his anxiety and panic attacks. And the quality of care and the amount of time it took us to get him that care, it's just shameful, frankly. How long it took us to get somebody that even believed he had a problem and he wasn't just lazy and didn't want to participate in school. And the amount that it costs, even with our pretty good medical insurance that I have through my employer, is just insane. So thank you very much for all the work that you do in that area.
My pleasure. How old is your son, if I might ask?
He's 16, a sophomore in high school.
Okay. We should talk after this.
And thank you for saying that, Ken. Yeah, the truth is, Chloe Valdary is one of the great buried treasures in the American cultural conversation. And so, every opportunity we have to bring good folks like you guys together is one we want to take advantage of. So let's begin here really quick. And so, the last time we talked to either of you, and I can't remember exactly how long ago it's been, but I think it's been at least about a year or so in each case. We were at that time, remarking in these separate conversations, remarking on the fact that polarization, political and social division in the United States has been creeping up to sort of a critical mass, and sort of wondering and trying to imagine how it is we could kind of rebuild American civic culture in a way that brings out the best in the American people and leverages that towards an actual political and social kind of climate of progress in the country. All of that was well before, something that none of us saw coming, I think, which is just this mass existential threat of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has led to a dramatic sort of altering, at least for the time being, of the American lifestyle, and obviously for people globally. We're all shut in our doors right now. Many millions of Americans have lost their jobs. It's an easy moment to be pessimistic in. But what I wonder is whether or not there are not opportunities for us in this moment to sort of build towards the type of sort of politics and culture of empathy, potentially of some sort of reconciliation, sort of closer kind of ties to each other as Americans, as we share this struggle against what President Trump has called this invisible enemy. So both of you, Ken and Chloe, have spoken to the issue of our political and social divisions in different but powerful ways in the past. I kind of want to get to some of your different points of view and statements going back in time a little bit. But to start off with, Ken, do you have any instincts about the moment that we are in terms of maybe any of the doors that are opening or closing, with respect to, the progress that we might make towards that more perfect union?
Well, the opportunity that we're presented with is that almost all human interaction now is online. If you thought we were an online-only society before, holy cow, now you can't hardly leave your house. And when you do, you're more likely than not wearing a mask, and you don't speak to strangers because you don't even stand close to strangers. So you're only really communicating via Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and things like that. And before, that was one of our biggest challenges, is teaching people that there's a real human being on the other side of the screen. All of the horrible vitriol that you spew to them gets absorbed by a person just exactly the same as if you said it right to their face. And a lot of folks did not understand that, especially people my age and older, in their mid-30s and up, who didn't grow up with that kind of culture. But now the opportunity is, since all of your social interaction is now through that medium, I'm hoping that this kind of shock of being submerged in this all online interaction will start teaching people, like, maybe they will realize that they're interacting with other human beings, since it's the only way they can do it. And once we come back from this, they'll maybe tone it down a little bit and realize that, if I'm not willing to say this to someone's face, maybe I shouldn't type it on their Facebook wall.
Well said. Chloe, is this a moment for the cultivation of more constructive habits? What doors are opening? What doors may be closing in your view?
Well, it's interesting. I think with regard to social media platforms in general, and to echo Ken's point that we're way more, interfacing with each other digitally as opposed to physically or in person. I think we have an opportunity in the sense that I remember a couple weeks ago I was on Instagram, and you know how you can see people's Insta stories, and sometimes, pre-COVID-19, when people would upload their Instagram stories, and they would sort of like chronicle, let's say, an entire concert or some event that they were going through in their day, some exciting event, and it would sort of be like 20 different sort of clips. I know for a fact that I would totally basically swipe through all of those clips. Like, I would look at the first one and then I would just sort of fast forward through all of them. Now, when I see my friends' Insta stories, I find myself, if there's like an event that they're doing sort of like in their house, whether it's cooking or something like that, I watch the entire thing. And that's a habit that I've noticed for myself has changed. And what that's taught about me is that during this time, I'm really being more patient. And I'm also paying attention more. And it's those little things, because I think we take those for granted. We can tell ourselves, we can assume it's not that big of a deal that habits like those are changing, but I actually think that it is a big deal. It's the subtleties that make all the difference. And so if we can translate some of that patience and some of that instinct to pay closer attention, first of all, we can cultivate that out of the current situation, and we can elongate that into whatever new reality we will be brought into, because I really don't think that whatever happens after COVID-19, I don't think it's going to be anything like pre-COVID-19, for better or for worse. I think there are certain things that, like, the fabric of our reality will have changed in very critical ways. But I hope that we will be able to bring some of the things that we're learning in this transition period, whether that's patience, whether that's paying attention, a deeper awareness of the fact that, quite frankly, life has always been chaotic, and life is, characterized by suffering. This is our fate as a human species. And so we sort of got into our bubbles and got into our, very modern world with all of its progress that we've made as a species, and it's great. But we sort of forgot about our frailty. We forgot that we're not invincible, and this has been a rude awakening and a critical reminder. So I hope we take some of those things that are virtuous and carry them forward to build a better society for all of us.
looking into the future is a difficult thing to do, of course, in many respects, but I would love to think and imagine that there is maybe a lengthening of the of the American attention span, if you will, that might allow us to your point, sort of connect a little bit more deeply with what we are actually going through as fellow Americans in our day-to-day experiences in a way that's not sheer consumption, right? In the way that social media diving tends to be. That makes me think of something that I feel like is a little bit connected. We recently had the journalist Monica Guzman on the podcast, and she observed that one of the striking things about this moment we're in is that we are used to having our major institutions and also, of course, our leaders in politics and other areas sort of, we're used to assuming that on some level, the big guys and girls up there in power have something of a hand on the wheel and are steering things and know more or less what they're doing, enough for us to be able to relax a little bit, relatively speaking. But that in this moment, there's not really much difference, it seems, between the people who are running everything and us who are just sort of here commenting and talking about things, because this moment is unprecedented. Nobody in America, whether, peasant or politician or what have you, so to speak, has ever been through this before. And so we're all kind of in the same boat on every level of society in terms of the uncertainty. And what that reminds me of is something that, coming from a different angle, Ken, something that you said on Bill Maher's program way back in the, after the 2016 election, when all America couldn't get enough of Ken Bone. By the way, Ken, a lot of people think that mustaches are coming back in style right now because of the quarantine lockdown situation. I think people just want to be more like Mr. Bone. This is just a good opportunity, a good excuse for us to do that. But
this society is even more of a nightmare than I imagined if people want to be more like me.
The dystopian future is upon us, man, and this is what it looks like. Ken Bone mustaches everywhere. I'm here too, man. I'm growing out mine. I'm actually going to quote you, Ken, but I'm going to quote you and actually have Chloe respond to it. And then I'm going to throw out a Chloe quote and have you respond to it, because I'm interested in the convergence here. But Ken, when you were on Bill Maher's program, Bill was hounding you, like everybody was at the time. We're not going to do this, so don't worry. But Bill was hounding you to figure out who you voted for in 2016. You didn't want to answer that question, but the reasoning was very interesting. You started talking about the length of elections in Canada. You mentioned the fact that in Canada, when they're electing a prime minister, they have an election that's 80 days and 80 days long, and it feels too long for many Canadians at that. But here in America, our elections run for 4 years, basically. They start the very day after, the president is elected. And you said in response to that, quote, "I don't want to feed that fire because that turns our political process into TMZ. It creates people like me. It creates nothing but sound bites and sniping back and forth, and it doesn't help solve the issue." And so, Chloe, what I'm wondering is, as part of what we might have an opportunity to establish here, the sort of a connection to each other as human beings that allows us to pull back a little bit from the kind of gossip culture and maybe sort of culture or even cult of personality kind of society that we have that surrounds not just Donald Trump, not just Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but this larger pattern whereby we don't connect with each other so much as Americans as we do sort of hitch ourselves to the bandwagon of one big personality or another and use that as as an excuse to not think critically about what's going on. Do you see the dynamic that I'm kind of trying to illustrate there? And do you think that there might be something of a shift unfolding?
Yes, I think, I was scrolling through Facebook yesterday and I forgot what source it was, but I saw an article title that said it's possible that influencer culture will never come back after this. Right. And that's, not just political, that's obviously heavily infused in places like Instagram. It will be interesting to see in general how celebrity culture fares after this, because I think celebrity culture today is wrapped up with our instinct for consumerism, for hyper-consumerism, the need to just consume all the time, has been a part of our culture for a very long time, and that's and part of a product of our productiveness as an economic powerhouse. Conspicuous consumption has been really, I think, seen as a virtuous thing in some cases, especially when you look at some of the politics of the 80s that were trending at that time. And so I think that because COVID-19 has put in sharp relief, again, the existential nature of our beings, which is that, we are fragile, we are frail, we are all going to die, we are all mortal, and we have seemed to forget this. It's very possible that this rude awakening will lead to us realizing the futility of engaging in this, Team X versus Team Y sort of politics, which doesn't strengthen. It strengthens neither Team X nor Team Y, and leads to a weakness and a weakening of the country. And I hope that we as Americans will take this opportunity to really engage in contemplation. I think that it's true, as you said, that, no president, no leader, no senator, no Congress member has ever experienced something like this, like the global phenomenon that is this pandemic. But at the same time, past presidents have experienced, local sicknesses. I'm in the middle of reading Team of Rivals about the political genius of Abraham Lincoln. And it's so fascinating to me, the dichotomy between that level of leadership and the level of leadership we're seeing today. Back then, folks, there would be seasons of typhoid, right? There would be seasons of tuberculosis where all of a sudden your youngest children would die, your relatives would die, and people were in leadership at this time, so they had to carry both the weight of the country and the weight of their loved ones dying. And they did it often with grace and with incredible honor and with incredible wisdom. So it's not as if, number one, we're incapable of doing this, and it's not as if we haven't done it before. But I think we need to be reminded that this is also a spirit that has been part of our culture. It's not just conspicuous consumption or consumerism that has been a part of our culture. And we've forgotten that there are other elements, more transcendent elements, that are part of, the legacy of America. And we really need to tap into that. And I think part of the reason why I'll say this one last thing, why we've lost sight of that is not just because of the celebrity culture that has infused our politics, but also because of the cynicism that has infused our politics. When cynicism infuses the politics, the people have no sense of wonder anymore. And if there's no sense of wonder, then there's no sense of hope, and everything is sort of a race to the bottom. So I think if we tackle both of these trends, the consumerism aspect and also the lack of a feeling of wonder, a lack of a belief in transcendence, I think if we can tackle that, and if we can use this moment to tackle that and to address that, then we can get back to that type of leadership that we saw in the past.
Well, at the heart of our work at Braver Angels is a focus on, you mentioned the sort of perils of our being stuck in a Team X versus Team Y mentality. At the heart of our work at Braver Angels is to sort of dig into the transcendent values that kind of run beneath the differences in the political ideologies, to sort of unearth those, to articulate them, to make them real in our conscious understanding, so that we can show Americans that we are all on the same team ultimately, that there's a political process within which competition and fierce competition is necessary, but it is meant to produce outcomes that inch closer and closer to the common good, right? But achieving that sort of shared framework for understanding who we are as people is a tough process, and there are interesting dynamics to it. Chloe, when you were, let's see, I think this is a quote that I pulled from watching you sitting down with Dave Rubin. So when you were being interviewed on the Rubin Report, you talked about your background, and if I'm remembering correctly, you got involved in advocating against anti-Semitism as an organizer and an activist as a college student at the University of New Orleans. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Right. And so you talked about your experience in that advocacy community. And part of what you said in the interview was, quote, we in the community were confusing two different things. The first question was, how do you combat anti-Semitism? with the question of how actually to get people to fall in love with Israelis, right? And so the way you sort of explained that was that it's a difference between fundamentally how do you get people to stop hating versus how do you get people to start loving each other, that is, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And so, there's been an approach taken to depolarization, you might say, which I think is focused on getting people to be more civil and respectful. But ultimately, the thing that maybe allows us to endure the most is having some honest affection, or at least basic sort of genuine respect for one another. So pivoting off of that and pivoting off of Chloe's frame for that, Ken, do you look at the moment that we're in, perhaps sort of, the willingness that many amazing people are showing to sacrifice on each other's behalf to help get their fellow Americans through this crisis that we're in? Do you see this as being an opportunity within which maybe we could graduate towards something closer to actually loving your fellow Americans or having some genuine respect as opposed to just not hating each other as much as we did yesterday? That's probably an idealistic question, but what do you think?
Well, I think Chloe raises an excellent point there. Is a lot of the work that I've done and put out there is like, hey, maybe don't be so evil to each other. Maybe don't say such nasty things to each other. We're all on the same team. Really, it's just a battle of ideas. It shouldn't be a battle of people. And I think Chloe strikes at the heart of the issue. It's like, well, instead of trying to alter people's behavior and get them to use nicer words, it would probably be more effective to get them to alter the state of their heart and realize that the people they're talking to are human beings first and foremost and their ideas later. Obviously a bunch of my libertarian friends right now they're really spiking the ball because they're like, see, we told you the government was incompetent and we told you that more power should reside at the state level because look at the response you're getting from states like California and then look at the anemic response you're getting from the federal government. See how that's going. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. But also like 30,000 people in the United States are dead. So maybe it's not time to like dance and gloat. Maybe it's time to realize that a whole bunch of your fellow Americans are suffering terribly, losing loved ones or losing their livelihood. And, we could come together on that. And then, after this crisis is over, maybe dissect it for which ideas worked and which ones didn't, rather than, pointing and laughing at the people that are losing so much. I know that, they're not trying to mock the people who have lost their livelihoods or who have lost their loved ones. It's just the message that comes out because we're so busy trying to tell ourselves that we won that we don't really have empathy for the people that lost. And that's kind of where American politics is. When politics turned into a sport where you root for Team Red or Team Blue, then when Team Red wins, you never look across at Team Blue and tell them like, oh, it's okay, don't worry, you'll get the next one. Or, yeah, I really liked this play you ran in the third quarter. Maybe we'll try to incorporate that. It's always, you guys suck, we're awesome, we're going to spank you again next time. So maybe
that makes me think of the day after the election coming up. So November 5th, and that's something we've been focusing on at Braver Angels because regardless of who wins, whether Trump is reelected or whether Joe Biden is elected, are folks really going to have the country they want? And I think to Ken's point, a lot of people are going to be immediately falling into either gloating or commiserating. So John, do you want to talk a little bit about our plan for the day after the election and how we're trying to embrace the spirit of Lincoln, to which Chloe just alluded?
Well, yes, happy to do that. Just before pivoting to that, what Ken was talking about also made me think about our Braver Angels debates program. We're in the movement building business here, guys. Ken, Chloe, I know that you guys know this. The movement that we are, I think, a part of and seeking to build alongside other organizations and honestly, people like yourself who in different ways, Ken, Chloe, both of you, have been creating the space and stimulating, I think, the intellectual and the conversational activity necessary to get us to this point. We've been striving to open up the space both conversationally but also organizationally, right, and collaboratively, for a politics that's rooted in a sincere recognition of the dignity that exists on each and every side of the American political equation, right? And in that vein, we have a debate program that is focused on accomplishing what it is you articulated, I think, and allowing us to sort of debate in a way where we compare the validity of our points of view, but are very upfront and honest about the fact that nobody has all the answers to any of the questions, and that the purpose of our debating these issues is not to be able to gloat or spike the ball at the end of the contest, but again, to advance the common welfare. And if you believe in that, if you believe in the idea of there being a common good, that means that you're seeking to sort of make your point in the debate, not to beat the other guy, but to help the other guy because he is actually on your team, he or she, even if you happen to be on opposite sides of an individual question, right? And so the day after the election, we are planning, working with a wide range of ministers and also different civic leaders and people from social impact and nonprofit organizations to have a wide range of religious services and civil and secular events across the country the day after the election that reaffirms our common commitment to one another as Americans, and just this basic idea that we share a country as one people, regardless of who the president of the United States happens to be, or who the president-elect happens to be the day after the election. So I look at that as fighting for what I would think of as, what should not to be Ken Bone's America, what should not to be Chloe Valdary's America, the America of people who see themselves first and foremost as human beings and as Americans, as opposed to simply, individuals who see their version of America as limited to only being Republican, Democrat, or whatever ideology you subscribe to. But it takes courage. It takes sort of hard work to do that. And I think that if we don't remember the fact that you really need fortitude to kind of engage empathetically with people who disagree with you and withstand the blowback that comes from that, it's going to be difficult for us to build up that space. So let's talk about courage really quick, guys, because we are braver angels now. And I consider both of you to be courageous individuals. I don't know if you guys see yourselves in that way. But you've both been through, I think, been through the gamut of social judgment in one way or another. And so, Ken, I'll start with you on this. I mean, you're a person who was picked out from complete and total obscurity. And for a certain period of time, I mean, after Trump and Hillary Clinton themselves, you were about the most famous person in America. And then after that, wound up having to endure, I think, a certain level of media scrutiny and people trying to pry into your personal life and trying to trap you in opinions or statements that would make you look bad. Was it ever difficult for you to maintain sort of the principle that made people love you to begin with, which is your willingness to sort of respect people regardless of where they're coming from politically? Did you ever, what did it take to sort of hold on to that way of being in the face of being basically targeted by so many folks in the media and trolls online?
Well, a lot of it just comes from, I have a really strong sense of self-identity. I know who I am and I know what I believe. And I know that I'm not a racist, bigoted, sexist, homophobe who loves when, people of color get shot down in the street. I know that I'm not a horrible person who revels in sexual assault and gets some kind of sick pleasure out of it, or whatever other things anybody's going to get accused of if they are randomly exposed to a lot of media scrutiny. So I know that's not me. My wife knows that's not me. My son knows that's not me. So having that strong sense of self-identity really helped get through it. But you have to recognize that not everybody has that, because not everybody was raised by good parents like I was, who told me, like, you know what? My dad was a great baseball player and I wasn't. I stunk. But he told me, like, hey, you know what? That's cool. You're really good at math. Good for you. Love you. I'm sure he would have loved me to be awesome at baseball, but he also appreciated that I was really good at calculus. So not everybody has that. So that's what I try to confer to people. And whenever I really get down about like the hate that gets piled on, I think like, if I can just get through this, then maybe that'll show the kid who, doesn't have a strong father figure or whose mom is overbearing and judges her because she doesn't put her makeup on the right way or because her skirt is too short or whatever. Maybe that person will be able to see me and learn, oh, I'm okay the way I am. Ken thinks he's okay the way he is, and look at his giant potato-sized head. If he's okay with that thing, then I can be okay with my thing. So that's, I know that's kind of a Mr. Rogers-y schmaltzy response, but that's how I got through the tougher times, is realizing, like, in my own small way, maybe I'm helping people by just enduring some of this hatred and knowing that it's not true. It's, it's disingenuous. It's people trying to generate clicks by saying, by taking words out of context or whatever. And hopefully that's something that we're learning as we get farther into this social media age, is everything that you've posted on Facebook and on Twitter and on Reddit and whatever, they're not press releases and they're not sworn under oath testimony. Sometimes they're poorly worded. Sometimes they're vague. Sometimes you're drunk and you post something stupid. Lots of different things can happen. It doesn't reflect who you are as a human being. Like if you use the wrong word, like I used justified instead of legal when I was talking about Trayvon Martin. And I feel bad about that, but I've never gone back and deleted the comment. I said that Trayvon Martin's shooting was justified because under the letter of the law, it was. That made people think that I was okay with this young man being killed in the street. Obviously, I am not. I wish with everything I got that he was still alive. That was a horrible incident. So I should have used the word legal instead. And people, mostly bad faith actors who just want to generate clicks or whatever, picked up on that and retweeted it and published it and put it all over the place. And you just have to realize, like, well, in the end, I can tell people what I believe, but I know what I believe. I know what I am on the inside. I know that I don't believe that people should be murdered in the street. So as long as I know that, I'm okay. And like I said before, hopefully other people can see that too.
Right. The details of one event or another aside, we're all, I think, more than just the perhaps, imperfectly worded substance of a 140 character tweet. And there's this desire, I think, in the culture that we are, coming from at the moment, to be able to define people as whole human beings, it seems, according to just what the little tiny bit that you can tell about somebody on the basis of what we throw out there on social media or some of our limited public statements and so forth. And that nastiness makes it difficult for people, for many good people, to be willing to wade into the public conversation. And yet we need good, thoughtful, and still imperfect people, right? Because we are all imperfect, to have the courage to do precisely that, to hold the space for the sort of empathy and reconciliation that we want to see. And so, Chloe, turning to you, you are a person who I know has been called by some, at least, something like an Uncle Tom, I guess, because you've fought against anti-Semitism and you're a strong advocate of Israel. And obviously, you have critics who feel passionately in other directions, but you've been insulted for those positions. I know you've been criticized by people who think that you're not far left enough and you're not conservative enough, right? I know that you've had
yes, quite confounding.
Right,
I know that feeling.
Right, Chloe. I know that you've been looked at as a person who, probably doesn't take her African American identity seriously enough from a certain perspective. On the other hand, I think that you've probably looked at as being too soft on social justice activists by some folks as well. And so, how have you? Where does courage come in for you in maintaining your moral center, in continuing to engage and acknowledge the dignity that exists on all sides of our political and social spectrum as Americans, while still withstanding the fact that you're also getting criticism, and maybe sometimes mean criticism, from some of these different places?
Well, it's an interesting question because I was recently asked by someone if I've ever been canceled or something like that. And I said to this person, it's actually interesting. I don't think I have ever been canceled. Actually, I think I'm too nonconformist to be canceled in any direction. And so, yes, while I've had my share of, sort of bitter rhetoric hurled at me, especially mostly in places like Twitter, I have to say that the philosophy with which, around which I try to orient my life, which is a philosophy rooted in, a search for spiritual transcendence, a belief in the innate dignity of human beings, an understanding of what it actually means to be a human being. So, for example, I think I've been training myself to cultivate this instinct whereby even if someone, is attacking me viciously on Twitter, I always view it through the lens of the fact that they too are human beings. And some of the heroes in my life are people who have literally, gotten members of the KKK to leave the KKK. So my understanding of the human condition is so, I think, developed and more complex than when I was like in college, for example, just because of the experiences that I've had and the reflection that I've done since then. That even though I'm, obviously saddened often by some of that rhetoric I get, I'm also just constantly viewing it through the lens of that human aspect, that human element. And as a result, I think I more or less tend to have empathy. And even when I'm responding to those people, when I choose to respond, I try to temper my response and root my response in a way that's informed by that empathy and informed by that awareness of the human condition, informed by the fact that, yes, this person has limitations, but I have limitations as well, because that's what it means to be a human being. And so it ends up becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy, because there's nothing that anyone can say or do that is outside the realm of human possibility. And so once you are anchored in that understanding of life itself, I think it's very hard to, it's a win-win philosophy. I think of, for example, when during the civil rights movement, several teenagers and college students would go into diners and refuse to leave the diners until they were served, to fight for integration. But prior to doing that, in order to withstand some of the blows, both physical and verbal, that they would receive, they would be trained in stoicism and practicing stoicism, which is all about, emotional regulation, getting behind your thoughts and allowing your emotions, experiencing the emotions, not suppressing the emotions, but understanding that all things pass. So they were trained in stoicism, and they were also trained in a radical conception rooted in Christianity, which is the concept of agape love, which is the idea that you should have, unconditional love for a human being merely because a person is a human being. And so those two things combined, they literally trained themselves not to fight back physically when they were attacked physically in those diners. And that, I think, is a picture into what being aware of the multidimensional nature of the human condition can allow you to do, can allow you to withstand, can allow you to overcome. And so, compared to those guys and girls who were braver angels, I'm not going through anything crazy. So, I look to them as a model. I look to them as an example. And I think that is really what gives me courage in the process.
Yeah, indeed. The philosophy of nonviolence is one that has had a great deal of influence in the evolution of better, now braver angels. We, I think, have been, many of us, moved and persuaded by this idea, and I can certainly say this about myself, that love, and by the way, love, you just used the phrase agape, Chloe, agape love. Dr. King described love as, quote, not quote, emotional bosh or mere sentimentality, but a transformational social force, something that is goodwill. I mean, some people have a difficult time with the term love. If you want to say goodwill, it amounts to the same fundamental thing, which is this idea that, to closely paraphrase King, we do not seek to defeat or humiliate our opponent, but to win him over and establish his friendship, to achieve reconciliation. right? That was the goal of nonviolent activism. That was the moral philosophy that guided Martin Luther King Jr., and that I think led this country to a great deal of progress. And you're right, Chloe. I mean, in comparison to what not just people in the civil rights movement, the nonviolent movement, but according to the things that many advocates for justice and social justice and liberty and freedom and American history have endured, what we're going through in this moment, is not necessarily as challenging as all that, and I'm grateful because it means that we are still the beneficiaries of a good many people from every, I think, avenue of America's moral history who have sacrificed to make this both a more equal and a freer nation, right? At the same time, we've got an obligation, I think, to sort of push that work forward. And Ciaran, you probably remember this, but it reminds me of Mr. Bone, of your own words at our convention last year. So we had our second annual national convention at the University of Washington in St. Louis, Missouri last year. And we actually had one of our very first Braver, it was Better Angels then, but one of our very first Braver Angels debates at the time. And Ken was one of our leading opening speakers. And Ken, you said something along the lines, if I recall correctly, of the idea, something along the lines of the thing that we have in common as Americans isn't our particular political point of view, but what we should be able to agree on is this idea that America is better today than it was yesterday. And if we do what we need to do, we all agree that we all want America to be better tomorrow than it is today. And so in your, and I know I'm butchering, the way you said it was far more eloquent, far more powerful, but I think that what you were getting at is this idea that there is kind of a belief in progress baked into the American character that I think doesn't just look at progress in sheer material terms, but that looks at it in the maturing and the greater expression of these ideals that we hold in common, ideals like equality, ideals like liberty and freedom, ideals like justice, and perhaps love and goodwill, right? If I can throw that in there. All of these are ideals that can express themselves in very different ways in terms of policy. And so our political opinions are going to be all over the map in terms of how we pursue them. But if we can remember that we're all seeking the common good, that is as American a sentiment as you can possibly have, I think, and something that we might start to remember, especially if we push each other to do so, in the context of this moment. So, Ken, could you revisit that sentiment for me and tell us, do you think that what you said at the convention a year ago still applies today?
I think it absolutely does. I mean, every day since the signing of the Declaration of Independence, I think America has gotten overall on a trend better. There are going to be days when it's worse. There are going to be days of tragedy. There are going to be days of injustice. But on an overall graph, we're going from less equal, less prosperous to more equal and more prosperous as a society. You look at, when America was founded, was everybody equal? Well, obviously not, because you could own another human being. What a sick, weird condition that was. And it took us a long time to fight our way out of that since we let it become so deeply rooted in parts of our society. But then it wasn't legal anymore. And then the day after that, were all of the freed slaves equal to white people in rights and opportunities? Obviously, they were not. And over time, we've done, well, I won't say everybody has done, but the good people with the heart of America, in mind, have done what they could do to make it better. Dr. King in the 60s realized, we're still not equal. It's been 100 years since somebody could own me or my children, and still, I could get the fire hose turned on me if I want to drink out of the wrong water fountain. When you look at that on its face, that's kind of weird, isn't it? And then we get all the way to today, where are we more equal? Yeah, we are more equal. But obviously when, John, you and Chloe are getting terms like Uncle Tom, which is one of the ugliest terms I can think of. Like, you have a certain amount of melanin in your skin, so you must think the way I think you should think. What a horrible, ugly term that robs you of your human agency. So as long as that's still happening, and obviously it doesn't happen to generic white guy number 3, me, we still are not 100% equal. But thanks to the efforts of people like yourself and Ciaran and Chloe, we are starting to overcome that. And you overcome that through, I believe, Chloe's idea of changing people at their heart. And Chloe, the folks you talked about that you know who have talked people out of being in the KKK, that's like the spirit of Braver Angels to me. I had the good fortune of being involved in those Braver Angels debates, and what I really loved about them is when they're over, no winner is declared. Nobody won, except that everybody won. Because like the Reds and Blues or the left and right folks, they get exposed to ideas in genuine good faith that they've never been exposed to before. Right. If you watch MSNBC or you watch Fox, then the ideas of the people on the other side are not presented in good faith, even by the talking heads that come on. They don't get the time and the opportunity to display their ideas in good faith and in, real clear ways. Well, at a Braver Angels debate, you do. You get an allotted amount of time. You get up and you clearly speak your idea. I think taxes should be lower because it equals opportunity between blah. And then the next person gets up and gets to say, I think taxes should be higher because then the government could help institute better opportunity for the people at the bottom who can't do it for themselves because whatever reason. And then at the end, you're like, well, that didn't sound at all like the talking heads. To me, that sounded like an idea that maybe I don't agree with, but I could see where it could possibly work. So now that the session is over, let's go over here and talk like human beings instead of screaming at each other through an electronic device. And it's such an amazing program that gets people to connect on a human level and helps us all realize that we all are working towards that better today than we were yesterday ideal. We just don't have the same ideas about how to do it. And once you realize that your opponent, for lack of a better term, really does want life to be better for themselves and their children and for you and your children, then it becomes easier to see each other as human beings. Like, maybe I wouldn't have done it that way. Maybe I wouldn't have painted my house that color, but it sure does look nicer than that old slab gray with the peeling chips on it. We're all working towards the same goal.
I'm grateful for the way that you explained all of that, Ken, and I'm grateful for the way in which your words really do capture the Braver Angels spirit. And speaking of that spirit, and by the way, I feel sad because we're coming to the closing minutes of our conversation. This has really been one that's been moving and powerful, I think, for Ciaran and I, and I'm sure for everybody who's going to hear this. But very quickly, and after that, we'll move to some last remarks from you both, Ken and Chloe. But Ciaran, to pick off of what Ken just explained, what can you say to our listeners and subscribers and folks who aren't already involved about how they can get involved in Braver Angels work, how they can help us and Ken and Chloe and all of our like minds and hearts in this country to work with us at Braver Angels to build up this beloved community and this more perfect union that we are looking to establish during the time of COVID-19 and well beyond.
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to run through some of the things we're doing as we bring everything online. But first, I just wanted to bring it back to the current moment we're in and the opportunity and challenge with which we're confronted. And I think what Chloe was saying earlier about how has this changed our reality, I think really resonated with me. I know that I've felt more present, more aware of my surroundings, more in tune, able to access new perspectives, able to sort of more fully be aware of focusing on what one can control and surrendering to that which one cannot. And that, of course, all comes in the context of increased anxiety and increased uncertainty and neuroticism and fear and isolation and mistrust. But I do think there is a unique opportunity, and I have to say that it's been remarkable to the extent to which Americans have followed the social distancing guidance. I think the original models that came out that estimated that I think, between 100 to 240,000 Americans would die even with social distancing, that was predicated on an adoption rate, so to speak, of 50%. But I just read an article saying that actually it's been 90%. And so I think that speaks to the fact that we might actually have more social solidarity than we think. And that has been peeled back and revealed by crisis. And I think to take a historical perspective, that's often what happens. Adversity is what reveals genius. And so I've been heartened by that because, going into it, I wasn't quite sure that that's the way things were going to go. And who knows, what's in the future. But I just think this has been a moment in which we've been forced to look inwards. And through doing that, I think we've become more deeply appreciative of our common humanity. And so we'll see how that plays out in the social, economic, and political arenas. But that's something that I'm choosing to focus on and meditate on and to be grateful of. And I think that if this conversation is resonating with our audience, and I think it will, just because Ken and Chloe, I think you guys are just so compellingly able to articulate these feelings and thoughts that we have at Braver Angels. But I think sometimes John and I get so close to the work that it's just so helpful to kind of have folks on who are, on the thinking about things in the same way, but also kind of a little bit apart from it. And it's just sort of very refreshing. Folks can get involved. We're taking all of our work online. So before coronavirus, the vast majority of our programming was predicated on face-to-face citizen depolarization, in-person gatherings, the Better Angels, heretofore named Better Angels debates that Ken mentioned. Obviously, with COVID-19, we've had to indefinitely postpone all of our in-person gatherings and take everything online. And that, too, offers both challenges and opportunities. Obviously, in some ways, it's hard to mimic that same level of intimacy that you can achieve with face-to-face engagement. But at the same time, you're also able to scale work a lot easier, to have a debate with 600 people where you break down people into different Zoom breakout rooms. You're able to bring together people from vastly different geographical areas who are divided normally by race or class or ideology. I mean, we can have a debate with people from wealthy Boston suburbs and rural Louisiana. It'd be pretty hard to organize that in person unless you had a lot of money. So there's a lot of opportunities. We're bringing everything online. Our flagship thing right now is a weekly Braver Angels debate. We've been talking actually about coronavirus, about the media, and we're going to be bringing all of our programs online. So red-blue workshops, depolarizing within, family and politics, one-on-one red-blue conversations. All of that stuff is coming online, and in some ways it's good because we've been hoping to do that anyway. But this has been a bit of a kick in the pants to do that. So, I'd encourage folks who are interested in doing this and sort of interested in doing what Ken just laid out, a venue that's not cable news, that's not what you're hearing on Twitter, that's not what you're hearing coming out of the candidate's mouth, that really is bringing things back to we the people, which is sort of what we're all about. So yeah, just go to the website. It's pretty easy to sign up, and we hope you get more involved because, after all, most of us are stuck at home glued to our screens anyway.
That's right. Yeah. So sign up, become a member, get all of our updates so you know what's coming down the pipe. Ladies and gentlemen, in terms of upcoming workshops, Braver Angels debates, follow us on social media at Braver Angels on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and help us build a house united. So for each of you guys, Ken, Chloe, thank you very much. 30 seconds. Tell the audience, what is your vision of the America that you want to see coming out of COVID-19? What could Ken Bone's America look like if we do things the right way? Coming out of this crisis and maybe after Election Day?
Well, so much of what I've focused on over the last several years is getting people, like I alluded to before, to realize that there are human beings on the other side of the screen. And I just want to reiterate that point, that this is a tremendous opportunity now that almost all of our interaction is through a screen. Do your best. If you're interacting with somebody, do it by FaceTime, Zoom, Skype, Teams, whatever, so you can see them and look them in the eye. And that will help you to realize that these people you're interacting with are real human beings and deserve the dignity to be treated as such. And if it takes this horrible tragedy to learn that lesson, then I won't say it's worth it to have lost all this life and opportunity, but I will say that there was a silver lining to this terrible time.
Indeed. Chloe, 20, 30 seconds. What does a Chloe Valdary America, what does a braver America look like if we do the things that we need to do coming out of COVID-19, coming out of Election Day?
Yeah, so just to piggyback off of that, I'd say it looks like Americans slowing down and being patient with each other, being patient with themselves, realizing that we're human beings, not political abstractions, which means that we're all imperfect. We all carry baggage with us. We all have to deal with, the full range of human emotions that we encounter as we navigate the challenges and obstacles that life brings to us. But that we have an incredible spirit of solidarity with one another. We have an incredible spirit of being able to endure suffering as it comes and rising above that suffering, and really orienting ourselves in the concept and idea of freedom in a deeper way than simply like being able to just do whatever, but really being able to bear the burden of our solidarity with each other, with our neighbors, with our political quote unquote opponents. There's something greater that transcends the combative nature of that defines our politics today. So I hope that we carry that sentiment and that spirit forward into the coming days, weeks, however long this lasts. And as we hopefully, get out of this and we'll make a better, braver America.
Well said. Ken, Chloe, Ciaran, as always, love you all. Let's move forward. We are building a house united. Thanks for listening to the Braver Angels podcast.